The Victory Road September Challenge just ended up finishing, and we have some pretty good results that should hopefully give us a bit of a clue to our future regional events. So today, I want to try and break those down for you guys, give you a bit of an insight into where I think the format's can be going, and really just all of my thoughts in general on Regulation H so far. If you guys look forward to more content like this, of course, like and subscribe for more, and consider becoming a member if you want to support the content even further. Just a couple dollars a month, and it goes a really long way into making the videos that you guys enjoy. Let me know down below what you guys think was the most surprising pick from today's tournament. And with that said, I want to first start off by going over, I guess, like what this tournament essentially was. So this was kind of like the big tournament really quickly before any of our regional events. It was Regulation H. This was hosted by Victory Road, of course. It was won by Taro Okada, who I believe ended up, according to other people who brought it up to my attention, I believe he ended up winning another Victory Road tournament in like this 2024 year. Technically not 2024 season, but the year 2024. So definitely a pretty strong Japanese player, of course. This is an online tournament. It's not official to the regulation. However, especially being like the last big tournament right before any sort of regionals, a lot of top players are playing in this. For example, we have obviously like Federico Camporesi, we have Joseph Ugarte, we have Wolf, who ended up just missing top cut. So a lot of strong names you guys would probably recognize if you follow the scene, obviously like Justin Karras as well, etc, etc. Like there are some really strong players here, so it's a good indication of what you guys could probably expect seeing at an actual event. A few key trends, obviously, we can see a lot of the format shifting towards at least some sort of more balance-esque archetypes, where it is no longer just Rain dominating the top cut, even though Rain did win, and that is something that we can go over really quickly, but it's not nearly as much Rain. Like Rain has already kind of fallen out of the format, I guess, and it's not that it's irrelevant, just it's no longer like winning. Like we have Rain at first, but the next Pelipper is shocking enough, it's not even in top cut. We actually only have one Pelipper in top cut, and it's the only team that won, which is kind of crazy. Like we have more Tyranitar in top cut than Pelipper, and it is the same team. So obviously, I mean, it's a little bit of bias. Crazy though of a sentence, because Pelipper up until this point was pretty dominant. Now, obviously, to go over the team that ended up winning it all, we do have the first place team, which was Taro Okada's team. This features things like a Focus Ash, Stellar Terra Pelipper that is based around Tailwind. We have partners like Archaludon and Bastia Legion with a Life Orb Salamence, actually. I know a lot of these types of teams that have been running Salamence on the Rain build have been going for Scarf, so I'm actually personally shocked to see Life Orb, but I know the damage output's a lot better in this format, so Salamence is like a real offensive threat. And with Terra Steel, obviously, it's a really good defensive Terra. Since you're not leaning into specifically Hurricane Stab, you're gonna probably be less reliant on clicking it as a flying type. And with Pelipper on the team too as a Stellar, this is a lot more of the offensive flying. There's still King Gambit here, which is really decent obviously for the Goldengo matchup, because it is one of Archaludon's worst matchups. And then we have a Mungus here, which is probably more to just give this team an out to things like Trigger Room, and it's decent for the Rain Mirror as it could draw in opposing Bastia Legion. A couple key things that stick out to me is one, this Bastia Legion is Terra Grass. It's probably for a few different things. Obviously, it's for things like Rocky Helmet, Rage Powder, and Mungus, but it's also really decent for things like Rillaboom, obviously, that are incoming. So overall, it's pretty cool. But the other thing is that we are seeing actually a drop from Flash Cannon to Snarl on this Archaludon, which is pretty interesting because you don't even see the Steel type move on King Gambit actually, and it instead goes for Low Kick, which is mostly for that Incineroar matchup. Honestly, it's a pretty cool shift since it does help Archaludon a lot more handle that Goldengo matchup, since you could Snarl through it and make that actually a very manageable Pokemon. I do like that a lot on this team. I think it's a really cool shift for Archaludon in general in the format. This team is really interesting as well, as it features things like, obviously, again, the Life Orb Salamence is a big one, but also the Terra Steel Amoonguss. I don't actually think I've seen Terra Steel. I'm assuming it's defensively for things like Goldengo. I'm trying to think of what Terra Steel would actually be for. If you know what Terra Steel would be for, let me know down below. I'm very curious. I know obviously it helps with like a flying resist, and with the Rain up, it does help defensively because you're not as weak to fire, but I'm curious as to what specifically you would be running a Terra Steel Amoonguss for. Anyway, moving on, we do have our second place team, of course, which is a Banded Dragonite Dozagiri team. It looks like pretty standard Dozagiri, where you're usually running Dozo as the Terra Grass 3 attack set, which is pretty common for this format. I don't think I've seen a Dozo that isn't running this set, except for maybe it's a slightly different Terra like a Steel, but I've typically been seeing Grass. You're gonna run the Tatsugiri, which again, usually I've been seeing Sash. Dual Dragon move is a little bit unique though. I haven't really seen people running Dragon Pulse and Draco Meteor, as I've typically been seeing like Icy Wind or some sort of supporting move here, but with Terra Dragon, that does make a bit of sense, to be fair. And then the Glamora, which while Meteor Beam is still pretty common in the format, I have been seeing more teams going towards like bulkier sets. I don't know if I've specifically been seeing AV, but it's definitely been like the not Power Herb set specifically on these types of Dozagiri teams. Talonflame is a pretty common partner as well in Dozagiri. Unironically, it's probably one of the more common partners with Talonflame, besides like I guess Primarina Goldengo offense. Goldengo is just really good with Talonflame as well, though it's just a really good spread Pokemon in general, so that makes a lot of sense. And then Dragonite is just a really good offensive piece here. It's Terra Normal Banded E-Speed, so So that brings back a lot of Regulation C merit here, which is not too surprising. It's still a good set on Dragonite, even if it doesn't necessarily have Chien-Pao boosting it. Besides Goldengo, we really don't have, well, I guess Goldengo and Annihilate. We don't really have a lot of good options for ghost types right now. There are some more that are coming up. I guess like actually Basculegion's a pretty good one. So there are some decent ghost types, but a lot of the ghost types that are relevant would really not like fighting Dondozo Tatsugiri. For example, as I mentioned, Basculegion, like what does Basculegion really do to it other than I guess Last Respects, which you really need to be in an endgame state for, and Dondozo could probably still take one, I'm sure, especially with the +2. And then you have ghosts like Goldengo, which again, Dondozo can farm through. You also do have things like AV Glamora for that, especially with Terra. You have Tatsugiri, you have your own Goldengo, which can at least put some pressure on it, especially with Terra Steel. And then there are some other picks too. And also Dragonite does have some decent offensive moves outside of just the Terra normal E-Speed with things like Outrage, Earthquake, and Ice Spinner. That Ice Spinner especially is pretty cool because it does help a lot with the Rillaboom matchup if you don't want to Terra Dondozo. And it also helps with Side Spam too, which is pretty good. In terms of our two teams in the semifinals, we do have a Ursaluna balance, and this is actually the highest placing Incineroar, which was 3rd place. It is a Safety Goggles Incineroar. There were not a lot of Incineroar in top cut, obviously. We only had 4 Incineroar. Yeah, we had 4 Incineroar, which for context, we had almost as many Blaze Tauros. We had 2 Blaze Tauros, we had 3 Aqua Tauros, and then we had 4 Incineroar. So Incineroar definitely has some like actual competition for that Intimidate spot in this format, but on a team like this, it is pretty good. It helps a lot with certain Pokemon that obviously would really not appreciate that fire and dark typing specifically. The Parting Shot is also really good to help pivot into Pokemon like Ursaluna on that Trick Room turn. So anything in particular, it's a lot less of a momentum sponge as opposed to a Pokemon like a Tauros, for example, on this team, or like a Gyarados or Salamence. Having that actual Fake Out and Parting Shot is very useful when setting up that Trick Room with Porygon 2. The Porygon 2 also having Terra Flying with Terra Blast is a really unique option because while you could have probably leaned into something like an Ice Beam, for example, for that Amoonguss matchup, getting the Stab is going to be really important here, and also it gives you a really good Earthquake partner next to Ursaluna. Terra Flying also is a decent way to just offensively pressure Rillaboom a bit better. I guess with Terra Ice, you're not getting resistance to grass, and Terra Flying again just partners better with Ursaluna, specifically spamming Earthquake. Same as that Terra Flying and T-Tar as well. Both mons really do help put some good pressure on Amoonguss, and we see Amoonguss actually also running a unique Terra type here, as it's Terra Psychic, which is probably here for Side Spam, because Side Spam is another archetype that will typically like to run these Trick Room type of builds, and having Amoonguss with Terra Psychic is pretty good for that. And then Goldengo is just plot Terra Dragon. Pretty standard for plot Goldengo, actually, that it's almost exclusively running Terra Dragon. I've seen a couple of other Terra types, more so on ladder, if anything, like Terra Water, but typically these plot Goldengo are almost exclusively Terra Dragon. So that is somehow the least shocking thing about this team besides the T-Tar spread. It's a really cool build on Trick Room overall. I'm glad to see that we're getting more T-Tar usage, and again, unironically, we got more T-Tar in Top Cut, albeit it was this same team that got 5th place as well, but still really cool to see T-Tar popping off. I think T-Tar has a lot of prevalence in this format, as usually a lot of lower power level formats, T-Tar is like a really good Pokemon. It's great into things like Incineroar, it's great at stopping Pelipper weather, and especially for these Trick Room type of teams, you could make T-Tar into a very menacing threat, because it's a great way to pressure Torkoal, but it also can clear weather and underpace Pelipper in Trick Room, so it's a decent threat on these types of Trick Room teams. One other team that I do want to go over for the top 4 is this type of Clefable Kingambit balance. So these types of teams are pretty common at this point, albeit it's essentially Rillaboom, Volcarona, water type of choice, which is Tauros Water or Primarina. We'll go over some teams later that are pretty similar to this, but do have the Tauros Water on them. Clefable has been a decent follow me option, as it's great into a lot of the setup of the format, and unlike a Pokemon like Clefairy, having Unaware is really valuable here. So giving up that slight bulk in the Friend Guard doesn't make a huge difference, because typically Volcarona can still get bulky enough anyway. The format is a lot weaker, so you don't need to have your Pokemon being as defensively benefited as long as Clefable can take that hit or two. And the Terra Steel synergy is really nice to take a lot of these different Steel and Poison type attacks going into Clefable in case someone tries to call a Terra correctly. We have the Sneasler here, which is a decent fighting type on a team like this, especially next to the Rillaboom. You can get a nice Grassy Terrain Unburden boost, and with the Terra Stellar having the Poison and Fighting Stab, it's really deadly. Dark Claw is also just a really unfair move. You also have options like Kingambit, obviously, which is a really good check to Goldengo, because while this team isn't necessarily terrible to Goldengo, Goldengo on Rain could be kind of a problem, since you would have Volcarona doing a lot less with Heat Wave, and Sneasler is pretty walled by it. Primarina at least could get hit pretty quickly by it with things like Thunderbolt and Make It Rain with Terra Steel, and that also would be decent to pressure Clefable, since Clefable can't really hit it back. So having Kingambit here is a nice way to actually get a consistent way to check that, especially pre-Terra. It's a decent team overall. These types of balances are doing really well. If we go through the list of the teams that got some good results, we can see that, for example, in the 7th place team, Kanade Mizuguchi has a pretty similar team where, again, you see the Water Tauros and the Goldengo here over the Sneasler and Primarina. The Water Tauros and the Primarina are both really good options. Really, it's kind of team preference. I personally have enjoyed using the Water Tauros build slightly more. I think that having that Intimidate support with Volcarona is a little bit more beneficial to it, as you get that nice physical offense drop, and then Volcarona can set up its own Quiver Dances. But to say that either one is necessarily better than the other, I would say is pretty just player dependent. dependent more so. They're both very viable ways to run the team. For some other teams, I'm not going to go through like every team that placed, but obviously some other teams that are some highlights here. Marco Silva ended up going 10-0 in Swiss actually, which is incredible, and then got out in top 8, running the same team that Federico ended up running. We have our first non-rain Archaludon, which is pretty interesting actually. Not only is there 2 Pelipper that ended up making top, I know I mentioned that only 1 Pelipper did, so my T-Tar statement was unfortunately inaccurate, but 2 Pelipper ended up top cutting. Still kind of insane though, because one of the Pelipper placed worse than both T-Tars. Otherwise though, again, we have the Archaludon without rain, which is pretty cool. It's next to Friend Guard Mousehold, but I did want to pull this up actually, because I'm pretty sure, yep, it's Hot Bomb Mousehold, which is probably meant to just like activate the stamina boost really quickly on Archaludon. You have some partners like Lamora and Gastrodon. Gastrodon's really good into that rain matchup, and it's a very deadly Pokemon right now overall, just bulky enough to be very difficult to KO when you have Yawn to pressure things like Dozo. With the Terra Fairy especially, you can get an immunity to both the Order Up and also the Wave Crash, so it kind of does need to just rely on Earthquake, which isn't the best way to hit your team when you have things like Terra Grass Lamora next to you as well for that potential benefit. You also have Clear Smog on Gastrodon anyway to make Dozo very weak. You have Terra Grass Volcarona, you have Terra Flying Archaludon, so there's a lot of ways around Earthquake that in theory could Terra instead of Gastrodon, and you could put up some serious pressure there. The Kingambit being Terra Fire is also really powerful. It helps a lot with the different Wisp mons, since we do have both Paldea and Tauros Fire, as well as Incineroar that are both running Wisp. Flame Body Volcarona is another mon that could in theory be a Wisp matchup for Kingambit, though Safety Goggles helps at least avoid that to a degree, since unless you're meaning to target it, you won't have to. The Gambit's also running SD on this team, which is pretty cool, as this team does have some decent Dozo checks, so Gambit can kind of just farm a lot of games with Sword Stance. And the only other unaware Pokemon that would really kind of threaten is Clefable, which Lamora has some decent ways to pressure since your Gambit's mono dark. A really cool team overall. I forgot to open this one in my other tab when I wanted to cover it. For some other teams that ended up doing pretty well, we have a lot of other really powerful teams here. I'm not going to go over all these teams, but we have some things like Sun, for example, which is running just typical Sunroom side spam. I think we'll see a team like this pop up pretty well. There's some other side spam candidates we might see though, things like Hisui Braviary, which could be cool for the rain matchup, since Hisui Braviary is decent to take advantage of the rain. It's a great grass killer in case your opponent has Pelipper and Amoonguss on the field for some reason, and Torkoal is already present, since you can just take advantage of their rain and go for Hurricane. Though Hisui Braviary is very Terra reliant is the big issue, so things like Hatterene are a lot more consistent. We also do have Gardevoir for a bit of a more fast mode, and DD Mail is still pretty good. You have a lot of other side spam candidates because Expanding Force is very spread, but having Hatterene and Armrouge I think is the best synergy here, as Armrouge is really good at taking advantage of Torkoal's Sun, and it also is really good at getting up its own Meteor Beam to boost, and Hatterene helps a lot with that Amoonguss matchup, especially if it goes for Terra, because you just have a complete immunity to Spore thanks to Magic Bounce, so it's a pretty decent option overall. And with Terra Fire and Hatterene, which is typically what they go for, you have a decent matchup into opposing Torkoal for a Trick Room. We have some other things that are pretty powerful here though, like we have a Dragapult team, and Dragapult's been a pretty big menace. For a lot of people that have been following more casually, Dragapult is probably like the second best dragon in the format right now. I would say second really only to Archaludon. It's the fastest relevant Pokemon by a good amount, and we're seeing a team that ends up just being like Ferrograph Dragapult balance with things like Incineroar. It's AV Incineroar on this team in particular, with things like Blood Moon, Life Orb, Ursa Luna. We have Amoonguss just as a good Rage Powder mon, though that could very easily also be like a Rillaboom, and you should get some good momentum going. And then we have Whimsicott for Tailwind and Encore Disruption. Really powerful team, and Dragapult under Tailwind is kind of a monster because you really can't easily outpace it without a Scarfer. We also saw a Scarlet actually top cut, and I do want to go over this team really quickly because it's a very interesting team. So this kind of plays off of the Volcarona sort of balance archetype, where you have like Primarina and Rillaboom on there as well, and with Kingambit, very good just to have Fire, Water, Grass with Kingambit. It's a very hard archetype to beat because Kingambit is like a really deadly mon right now, especially with all the Intimidate going around. While Incineroar used to just fallen off, you still do it with Tauruses, you still have Salamence. I would argue Gyarados might see play, but it is not exactly top cut relevant, but it's still not terrible as it's a water type Intimidate mon that has an immunity to Dozo Earthquake, so technically you can get some merit until Dozo runs Oblivious, and then you're really kind of fucked, but it's objectively way worse than the other 4. It is technically like the 5th best Intimidate mon, I would argue. But the point being is there's a lot of Intimidate, and like 4 relevant Intimidate mons at that, so Gambit's like a really good anti-Intimidate pick right now. Annihilate might be slightly better, but Annihilate also didn't really place that well. I would personally argue Annihilate might fit better into the format, though seeing Sneasler on a team like this might be more an indication of where the format will go. Sneasler ends up being a focus size user on this team with coaching, which is pretty good next to Ceruledge and Rillaboom and Kingambit, all of which really appreciate that physical defense boost. Then we have a Follow Me Electabuzz that also has Electro Web. The 1 of 5 speed in Electabuzz is really dangerous in this format actually, especially as a speed control Pokemon, giving a balance team like this a really powerful option. Also having the Vital Spirit here, drawing in Amoonguss Spore is really nice. Your Terra Water is great for your rain matchup, and it's also probably a little bit better for things like, for example, Goldengo, since you do have the sleep immunity anyway. You don't need to go for grass as your option to resist rain, so it's a pretty decent team overall. I actually like this balance a lot. I think it's a very clever team. Shout out to Francesco Raga, who ended up building his team and got 10th with it. It's a really cool team. I'm actually a huge fan. I would love to try a team like this on stream. I think it's super fun in my opinion. And I'm glad to see some Scarlet up too. It's a mon that does really good overall. Having Poltergeist in its arsenal is a very deadly option. It's definitely more of a niche pick, but I do think we'll see some more coming up in the future for sure. I'd be shocked if it just never came up again. One thing I do want to go over, it's the last thing really relevant in Top Cut. We do see a lot of other cool teams, like for example, this very Regulation B-esque Palmot Dozagiri team, still relevant because it's just a good team overall. It's just a good collection of mons. We have more Dragapult balance, obviously Mimikyu and Smeargle is pretty cool. But the one thing I wanted to go over, the last thing is in the Top Cut actually, Alessandro Cagliari. I think his team actually just missed bracket, must have lost in like the win-in round. That's very unfortunate because it's a very cool team. This team ends up consisting of Weavile, which is actually Weavile's only rep, I think, all gen. If someone else knows of a Weavile making a day 2 even, I would love to hear it, because I don't even think in Reg A Weavile made a day 2 appearance, but I might be misremembering. Either way though, it's Weavile's one of only accomplishments, which is pretty cool. Weavile obviously has Axel and Knockoff, which did not have in earlier DLCs, so the Terra Stellar set is actually pretty interesting on it. We have a Terra Fighting Indeedee, which is probably here for that King Gambit matchup, because King Gambit has been rising a lot, as it also does help with things like our Caledon pre-Terra. And you have the choice specs of the Expanding Force here. We have an Intimidate, Tauros Blaze Paldea, which is pretty cool. We have Glamora here, Drifblim, which is not a Pokemon you see every day, but it is a cool option on terrain teams, especially for Tailwind. And with the Acrobatics, it does help a lot for that opposing grass type matchup into Rillaboom, in case if we can't go for Weavile or Tauros for some reason. And then finally, we have a Moongus, which is a pretty cool pick here. It's a very interesting team to say the least, because it's like Psy Spam without leaning into Psy Spam, because it kind of like draws an opposing Psy Spam abusers, and Weavile can just kind of say, no, you're not getting this off, and tear through them. So I do like the team a lot. It's an interesting team to say the least. Do I think it's super indicative of where the format's gonna go? Probably not really, but it's a cool team nonetheless. I wanted to give it some love. Moving on to some other teams that I think could maybe have some relevance, or at least show some unique things going off on them, at least for teams that made in day 2. There are a couple others, some cool teams, obviously. Wolf's team, I don't know if I'd say this is like the future of the format, but Wolf ran it, so someone at your local at least will probably use this in the next couple days. You will probably fight it on Showdown for half your matches in the next couple days, because even though Wolf didn't win the event, Wolf made day 2 and it appeared on stream, so someone on Patreon is already using his team and already at the top 500 with it. The EVs are already probably in some like 6 different YouTubers YouTube videos that are going up within an hour of this video going live. Specs Hisui Typhlosion is pretty powerful. We have Whimsicott as the Sunsetter here, which is interesting for sure. A lot of the Sun team's early format were just running Torkoal, but Whimsicott being here is cool. I like the Clefairy Ape. I think this is an interesting duo. We don't see a lot of Ape even really represented until out of Top Cut, which is kind of a shame, because I think Ape is a really good mon still, and a lot of teams benefit from it because it's just a powerful fighting type. And on Tailwind like this especially, I actually think it could be good because it makes up for Ape's biggest weakness, which is the lack of speed. And Assault Vest Annihilate on here, albeit I don't know if I'm the biggest fan of that, but with beat up Whimsicott, you can at least still get it pretty deadly pretty quickly. And you have Clefairy for some good follow me support, and it's a better Pokemon technically speaking than Mousehold probably. That's more just conceptually. I think Mousehold's better into the format. Just Clefairy is a decent strong pick still next to it, and it benefits a lot of the other Pokemon here better. We also have a Blood Moon, which is great on Whimsicott teams. Whimsicott for Rig, Blood Moon is still a pretty powerful duo, albeit it's definitely not as potent as it was in Reg G, but it's still a duo I think has a lot of power, since the Blood Moon and Typhlosion Hisui actually has some pretty good synergy, as Typhlosion Hisui is a great option to just spam fire type moves, and a lot of the Pokemon that would offensively pressure it, like Rillaboom for example, are not really going to be alive to hit Ursaluna, so it's a lot less Terra reliant. And also, like, really, what are you switching in on this? And if you say Pelipper, I'm gonna hate you because you shouldn't. Why do you have such a good counter to Hisui Typhlosion? I hate you. But Pelipper having a lot less rep is actually pretty interesting, as it makes this team actually a lot more prevalent. And while T-Tar is still kind of an issue for it, you have things like the Sunnyday Whimsicott, which getting rid of the sand is a big deal for T-Tar, and you also have Ape, which can pressure that pretty well, as well as Blood Moon. So there are still some lines into things like T-Tar, which are more relevant. The one interesting thing that I think really sticks out here, though, is the Terra Dragon for Rig. Curious if that will actually go anywhere. I think it's an interesting way to run for Rig for sure. Dragon's a lot better of a defensive Terra than it's been in a while. I would say probably since like Reg E, it's probably the best the Dragon's been, but curious to see how that goes in the format. A couple other teams that were relevant, literally the next placing team, actually 21st, has a Hisui Samurott. I think Hisui Samurott's a little underexplored of the 3 Hisui starters. Well, I'm shocked that no real usage from Hisui Decidueye is up here. It's still a good pick in my opinion, and it has some niche in the format for sure. Hisui Samurott is a mon that it's the only Hisui starter I've actually not seen really represented. However, in this tournament actually placed better than every single Hisui Decidueye. I think it's important to note at least. It's not going to be a super relevant pick, but it is a dark type that bullies these Sunroom teams, especially the Sunroom Psy Spam builds. So that is something that it has interesting, and it also is really good at defensively pressuring Incineroar. The Seller set is pretty cool on it. I do vibe with this. It's a good Sacred Sword Mon too into Archaludon. It has some actual niche to it. I think in a format like this, I don't think it's going to be a super relevant pick, but the team overall is a pretty cool Tailwind team nonetheless. Going through some of the other teams that place really well, we have Vivillon. Oh, right. I want to go over the Vivillon team, right? I have that literally pulled up right next. Vivillon's pretty cool. Terra Fairy set. I'm not sure why Terra Fairy specifically. Just a good typing to be fair, but I would just assume that Terra Ghost Focus Sash would probably be a build on a Pokemon that's not as bulky as Vivillon. It's a good Compound Eyes user for sure though, and just having Compound Eyes plus Sleep Powder means you're going to get most Pokemon to sleep. It also takes advantage of Hurricane pretty well, because in case you don't have Rain up necessarily, which this team doesn't have a way to set Rain, so that actually could maybe come up, you could still get off some pretty accurate Hurricanes, and it's a powerful move, especially with the low defensive stats of a lot of Pokemon right now. This team also has some options like Garchomp, of course, Archaludon as well for a nice Dragon Spam option. You have King Gambit as a backup Dark type, and with AV, it's a lot more defensively oriented with a Terra Flying for a nice Earthquake partnership with Garchomp. Primarina, which is just one of the best Pokemon right now. Like, if we're gonna be honest, Primarina is probably top 5. And then we have Paldean Taurus Blaze, which is a nice Intimidate option to round out this team. I'm not sure if I would have preferred Incineroar or Taurus Blaze here. I know Taurus Blaze is technically speaking like a little bit more relevant right now at least, but I feel like Incin might have been a better call here. Having a good pivot into Mons like Garchomp could have been cool, but to be fair, Taurus Blaze still offers a lot of good benefits. Obviously, it's a lot faster, and in a format like this especially, like that base 100 speed on Taurus is really nothing to scoff at. And not only that, but it probably is a little bit just better in terms of an offensive stab right now, but I feel like this team could have benefited a little bit more from a Parting Shot pivot or just a good fake out Mon, but otherwise I don't have a lot of notes. And to be fair, again, this team plays way better than I ever would in a format like this. We have a couple other cool teams. Kingdra, which Kingdra's highest placement, if we cut back to here really quickly, Kingdra's highest placement was 28th, and it was on a very heavy water spam team by Max Simon. Pretty interesting to see, of course, because there's a lot of Rain once we get out of the top bracket. We immediately see 1, 2, 3 Rain teams still in the top 32. So Rain suddenly does come up a lot more in these like still high-ish placing teams. This team in particular is like water spam, where we have Dozo, Tatsugiri, Pelipper, and Kingdra, which for anyone who is an astute viewer who's played a lot of Scarlet Violet VGC, it's a very reminiscent team of the one water spam team that had Dreadnought on it, but instead you have Kingdra, which is an actually viable option. Terra Water is really nice in this because you have Muddy Water and Hydro Pump, two very spammable water type moves. This type of team didn't really need a Basket Legion necessarily, because one, you have the Goldango as a good offensive ghost here, but more importantly too, Dondozo is a really good physical water type on this type of team, so you don't need Basket Legion, and having that special Rain Abuser is really good. I'm not sure if I would have vibed more with Ludicolo on this team or not, but at the same time though, Tatsugiri is a lot more of a utility focused Mon. You're ideally not proccing it, and you're using Kingdra instead as that really good fast offensive dragon, and Kingdra's also just a lot faster than Ludicolo. With Indeedee especially, I mean, the synergy is probably a bit better to go with Kingdra because you're not gonna bank on using Ludicolo for like fake out pressure, so I can get it for sure. I think it's a decent team choice for sure to have that, but I think Ludicolo could have still been an interesting pick here for sure, and I'm just kind of curious if the builder, I'm sure the builder ran through it obviously. There is one other pick though that I wanted to go over, which is Weezing-Galar. It's a kind of cool archetype right now. Its best placement here was 39 by CA Mengru. This team consists of Weezing-Galar, Slacking, Talonflame, Garchomp, Sinistcha, and Kingambit. Top 4 are pretty common on these Slacking Weezing-Galar teams from what I've seen on ladder at least. Last 2 spots, I've seen a few different things. Like I've seen Goldango here, for example. I've seen Primarina. Obviously, I'm in Primarina. I'm not huge on Primarina with this type of team because Primarina is very ability dependent, like even more so than a lot of other Pokemon. There are a lot of different Pokemon for those last 2 slots. I think the Sinistcha is a really good call actually next to Slacking, because you have a nice way that can just kind of heal back up Slacking and allow it to do some very deadly damage with Terra Stellar. And then Kingambit's a great check to things like Goldango, so you can spam Double Edge a lot easier, as Goldango is like the relevant ghost type right now. So this is super cool. I like this team a lot. I vibe with it heavy. Talonflame's a great Tailwind setter for Slacking as well, just clearing through steals so you can spam normal move. And overall, I mean, it's a pretty cool team. There's not any other teams I wanted to super eye over, but some other cool trends obviously looking at this. Again, we see a lot more Rain as we go lower in the list. Things like 37th, 38th, both are running Rain, which are pretty similar teams, just one is a Primarina, one is a Murkrow. We've seen our first Snow team at 35th. Looks honestly just like standard balance with Snow, which is pretty cool. It plays similar, I guess, to that Electabuzz team from earlier, but you have Snow support, which is pretty cool. Overall, really interesting team for sure. I am curious if we'll see more Snow results. We see a Bramblegast, we see a Como team as well. These are both interesting picks. I think they both have some relevance to the format for sure, but definitely more niche picks. And then some other teams that ended up placing well. We see a lot more of a traditional Sun team with like Lilligant, Torkoal, Typhlosion. This is a lot more of like what I've personally seen on ladder, but I do think that Wolf seems a little bit more creative and a little more clever for the format right now. We see even Overquill. Overquill's been kind of a cool niche pick. Shockingly, Hydreigon did not get that great results. Like we see it a lot more in these lower placing teams, but if we look at like the top end teams, one Hydreigon made 11th, and then other than that though, we didn't really see a lot out of Hydreigon, which is kind of surprising. I still think Hydreigon's one of the best pseudos in the format, really only to Archaludon, which I don't know if Archaludon technically is a pseudo, but it's like in that same vein. And then like Dragapult, I would say is probably about on par. And then you have like Garchomp, Mence below that. But I'm kind of shocked by how low placement we had for Hydreigon. I think it's a really good mon to a lot of archetypes like Psyspam. It's great on Tailwind, great in Dozo. So I'm just shocked by how low rep we had for it. I guess for my current thoughts on the format, we have Rillaboom was most used Pokemon. Okay, so the one thing I will say, since the top 10 video came out, I've been pretty staunch of the belief that I think Rillaboom is probably the best Pokemon in this format, and I think it will only go up. Rillaboom, I think, unironically, will take over that Incineroar replacement usage, where we're seeing it like 50-60%. And I think that when we see the Rillaboom usage from actual regionals, it will be reaching at least 50%. Goldengo, definitive second best mon. Archaludon is kind of falling off. I do think it will continue to go down as balance teams do get better. Pelipper will probably get a bit worse. Archaludon will get a bit worse by proxy. People, I think, have finally started to find their lines into Archaludon as well, which is pretty huge. We see Amoonguss still in the top 10. That will go up. Incineroar will also definitely go up. While Kingambit is a huge pick right now, and I think it's a really good pick right now, Kingambit will definitely fall off a bit for sure. I do feel confident in that because I think at come regionals, we will start to see a lot more Kingambit answers, especially after this tournament. I think it's more of a response pick than like an actual top 5 pick necessarily, but Kingambit will still be very good. Primarina, this is shockingly one of the lower usages that I've seen Primarina. I've seen it a lot of top 5 recently. So seeing it at 7th, it's still high placement for it, of course, but just it's a lot lower than I've seen it at recently. Definitely the lowest Pelipper I've seen in a while. We still have some other cool picks here though. Things like Sneasler is pretty high ranking. Mousehold is pretty high ranking. T-Tar actually got 16th highest usage, which is incredible. I haven't seen a lot of T-Tar all format, but I know it's been like a kind of good thing. Typically when I've seen T-Tar, it's been on more Excadrill focused teams or like Garchomp T-Tar focused teams. We do see some of those obviously here, but like again, one of the highest placing T-Tar teams was literally just no sand. It's just T-Tar because T-Tar is just a good pick. And I think it's a pretty cool thing to see because T-Tar is just a good mon, and I think a lot of people forget that. Let me know your guys' thoughts down below, and if you want to see more content like this, of course, leave a like and subscribe. If you guys do enjoy this type of video, let me know, and I'll cover the next regional, since that should be like next week. I'll cover that for our next Thursday upload. Also, if you want to join, become a member, help support the content out a lot. We do have our current members, Josh, aka Ultra Player, and Zeke Zero. Thank you guys very much for your support. It means the world. Members will be down below. Of course, you want to hit that join button. We're streaming on Friday. I know I said I was gonna stream last week, but then right when the video went up, I ended up having some health issues, so we will be streaming this week tomorrow. It should be somewhere between 6 and 8 p.m. EST start time. I'll try and have that stream already scheduled by the time this video goes live, so make sure you guys check that out. Also, thank you to both our editors, Dose, who handles the Sunday videos, and Becca, who handles the shorts as well as our Thursday content. Both their links will be down below. And with all that out of the way, I'll see you guys in our next video. Until then, peace out, guys.